Hey everyone, welcome back to Math Lunch. I'm Vanch and I'll be teaching you math, obviously. Now in the last video we looked at the derivatives of some common functions such as e to the x or the exponential function, ln of x, also known as the natural log function, the sine function, and the cosine function. So in this video we'll be looking at the derivatives of functions that are either multiplied or divided. So that's going to translate to the product rule and the quotient rule. Now I think as you'll see they're basically just formulas that you have to memorize, so it shouldn't be too bad. But anyways, if you're ready, I am too. Let's get started. Okay, so we're going to start off with the product rule. So the product rule is when we have the derivative of some function, we'll call f of x, multiplied by another function, and which we'll call g of x. Okay, so we don't know how to evaluate this, and for now it's basically just a formula that we have to memorize. I'm not going to be proving it in this video because that's like a whole other thing. But basically, the formula is, so the formula would be the derivative of the first function, so f prime of x, times the second function, plus the derivative of the second function this time, times the first function. So it's actually pretty easy to think about. So it's like, we still have to take the derivatives of both functions individually, but for the first part of it, we're just taking the derivative of the first function, but leaving the second function by itself. Then we're adding the derivative of the second function times the first function by itself. So that's all the product rule is, basically. Let's do a quick example. So suppose we wanted to find the derivative of a function like, we'll say cosine x times, what should we do? Let's do 3 ln of x, right? So here we can do the product rule. So we know that this would be derivative of the first function, which is cosine x. Now the derivative of cosine x, as we remember from the last video, is just negative sine of x, right? So negative sine of x times the second function, 3 ln x, and then plus the first function by itself times the derivative of the second function. Now what's the derivative of ln x? That would just be 1 over x, that we also covered in the last video. And then times 3, so we'll just get 3 over x. So if we wanted to simplify this a bit more, we could do like negative 3 sine x ln x plus 3 cosine x over x. That's your answer. Let's do another real quick example. We'll do the power rule in this one too. So suppose we had a function like x to the fifth times e to the x, right? So in this case, it's the same thing, just the same formula. So derivative of the first function, we're just going to use power rule, drop the exponent down. So we'll get 5x to the fourth times the second function, which is e to the x, plus just the first function by itself, and then times the derivative of the second function. Now we remember a really cool property of the exponential function is that the derivative of it is just the same thing, right? So the derivative of e to the x is also just going to be e to the x. So yeah. And we could factor this further, but we really don't have to. But just to show you what it would be, we could take an x to the fourth and an e to the x out of both terms. So x to the fourth times e to the x. And we'll be left with 5 plus x. Yeah. So that's all the product rule is. Now let's go over the quotient rule. Now, just by the name, you can tell the quotient rule is going to have to do with dividing, right? So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to divide functions. So like one function, f of x, divided by another function. Okay, this one is also just a formula that you have to memorize, but this one's a bit more annoying. So this is actually going to be this is actually going to be the derivative of the first function, very similar to start off, times the second function, minus this time, not plus. Last time was plus, this time it's going to be minus. So minus first function times the derivative of the second function, right? So far we're the same as the product rule, right? In the product rule, the only thing that was different is that we had a plus right here. But the reason the quotient rule is a bit tricky is because then you have to divide this whole thing by the function that's in the denominator squared. So yeah, that makes this a bit more tricky. What my math teacher actually taught me is this little thing that can maybe help you. It was low d high minus high d low all over the square of what's below. So the square of what's below. And the reason this works is because low is just going to translate to whatever's in the bottom, right? Like low is in the bottom. D high, D stands for derivative, and then high is going to stand for whatever's on the top. So low on the bottom, derivative of the thing that's on the top, and then same thing, high is going to be on the top, derivative of what's below, and then the square of what's below. So that's what my math teacher taught me. Hopefully that helps you guys too. So yeah, this one's a bit more annoying, and the reason it's like this one's a bit more. The bottom part is a bit more complicated because over here we had the d high part first, and then the low part second. But that doesn't matter because multiplication is like commutative. So yeah, low d high minus high d low, all over the square of what's below. Hopefully that helps. So let's do a quick example with this. Again, this is just like, these are all just formulas you have to memorize. It's just no really way to derive this, just quick memorization for this, especially on the AP exam. They ask, like, they always have like a bunch of different derivative rules that you have to memorize, so I just recommend straight up memorizing these because the derivation of these formulas is pretty intense. But anyways, let's do an easy one. X squared over sine x, right? So first thing we're gonna do, we're gonna take the derivative, or I'll do the first thing. So low d high, low is gonna be sine x, d high, derivative of the top part, so that's gonna be derivative of x squared, which if we use the power rule is just 2x, minus high d low, so high is x squared, derivative of the low part, so derivative of sine x is just going to be cosine x, as we saw in the last video. So cosine x all over the square of what's below. So sine x is below, so we'll just do the square of sine x, sine square x. So that's going to be the derivative of that. Yeah, it's kind of complicated, but not too bad. Let me show you another one actually with e to the x. And the really cool thing with e to the x is that some things actually cancel out, as you'll see. So let's do what can we do? Let's just do cosine x over e to the x. So low d high, so low is going to be e to the x. D high is going to be negative sine x minus high d low, so cosine x. D low, so again, derivative of e to the x is just e to the x, all over the square of what's below. So e to the x squared. So a really cool thing we can do here is we can actually take an e to the x common, or by common I mean factor it out, right? So we can factor out an e to the x, and then here we'll be left with negative sine x, and then here we'll be left with negative cosine x, and then on the bottom we'll still be left with e to the x squared. And now what we see is that the e to the x and the e to the x squared cancel out. So now we're just left with e to the x on the bottom, right? So here we're just left with negative sine x minus cosine x over e to the x. These are the type of things that excite me, like just random math stuff. It's stupid, I know, but it's exciting, whatever. So yeah, the e to the x's cancel out, and this becomes a pretty nice, simple answer. That's quotient rule. So that's going to be it for this video today. We just went over the product rule and the quotient rule, which I have right here if you wanted to take like a screenshot or something of it. And I hope you can actually see how similar these two things are, because like if you just look at the top term of this and rule itself, you can see that the only thing that's different is the minus right here, and then you have the g of x squared term right there, or like the denominator squared, right? So they're pretty similar, just quotient rule is a bit more annoying. But yeah, otherwise that's it. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you found it helpful, and I will see you for the next video. Bye bye.